Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome, my dear students of grade 8, second preparatory, to a new lesson in science. We will continue our lesson reproduction in plants. In the last lesson, we have studied the parts of the flower, which is the organ of sexual reproduction in the plant. And we have studied the flower has 4 walls: calyx, corolla, androcium, and gynocium. And we said also that the flower has 2 types, may be unisexual and may be bisexual. The bisexual flower, or the typical flower, we can give it another name, hermaphrodite flower. It contains both male organs and female organs. It contains stamen and also contain carpels. Stamen, which produce pollen grains in the anther. The pollen grains are the male gametes. Pollen grains are the male gametes. They contain half number of hereditary substance of the species. And the carpel, or the ovum, produce the ovum or the ovule. The ovule contain a cell called egg cell or ovum. This egg cell is the female gamete. It contain half number of hereditary substance. When we are talking about sexual reproduction, we are talking about 2 steps. The sexual reproduction occur in 2 steps. First step is called pollination, and second step is called fertilization. So let's start with the first step of sexual reproduction, pollination. We can define pollination as the following. Pollination is the process of transfer pollen grains from anther of a flower to the stigma, from the male organ to the female organ. As you see here in the picture, the anther contains 4 chambers. Each chamber produces large number of pollen grains. When the pollen grains become mature, the anther split vertically and the pollen grains spread in the air to transfer to another flower, to the stigma of another flower, to make fertilization process. The pollen grains are small cells formed in the anther inside the pollen chambers. When those grains become mature, the anther split longitudinally and the pollen grains spread in the air like dust. Okay, let's move to types of pollination. Types of pollination. We have 2 types of pollination. First one is called self-pollination or auto-pollination. The second type is called mixed pollination or cross-pollination. Let's start with defining self-pollination or auto-pollination. It is a transfer of pollen grains from the anther of a flower to the stigma of the same flower or to the stigma of another flower on the same plant. As you see in the picture, the pollen grains transfer from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or to another flower but on the same plant. There is some conditions for the self-pollination. For example, the flower must be bisexual or hermaphrodite. It has the male organs, which contain anther, and the female organ, which contain carpels. The anther and the stigma are matured in the same time, like flax plant. And non-blooming the flowers until completion of fertilization process, as in barley plant. As in barley plant. Okay? If you ask me a question, pollination in barley plant is self-pollination. The answer will be because its flower never bloom until it complete fertilization process. Now let's move to another type of pollination, which is called mixed pollination or cross-pollination. It is a transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the flower to the stigma of another flower on another plant, but in the same kind. Another plant of the same kind. This can happen in bisexual flower and also in unisexual flowers. Maybe the flower is bisexual and its anther and stigma are not matured at the same time, such as sunflower plant. And maybe the flower is unisexual, such as in maize or corn plant. If you ask me a question, give reason, pollination in sunflower plant is mixed pollination, the answer will be because the anther and the stigmas are not matured at the same time. Now we are moving to another part, methods of mixed pollination. Methods of cross or mixed pollination. We have three methods. Maybe the cross-pollination or the mixed pollination occurs by the help of the air or wind, by the help of insects or some small birds, and also by the help of the human, which is called artificial pollination. Let's move to the first type, by the air, pollination by the air or the wind. There is some conditions for this pollination. Characteristics of the flowers in which pollination occur by air. Number one, stigmas. The stigma may be feathery-like and sticky, of course, to catch pollen grains from the air. And the anther is hanged and easily opened by the air. And the pollen grains are produced by huge number, of course, to compensate the number which is lost in the air, which doesn't make pollination. And they are light. The pollen grains are light. They can be carried by the air easily. The second method, pollination by insects. There is some conditions needed for pollination by insects. Characteristics of the flower which pollinates by insects. Number one, petals. Petals must be colored and scented. Of course, why? If you ask me, give reason. Of course, it will be because the colorful petals attract insects like bees to feed on their nectar. And pollen grains must be sticky or have a porous surface. Like the shape here, the pollen grain is sticky and have a porous texture. It is not coronavirus, of course, but it has the same shape. The pollen grain here is porous, has some projections to stick to the stigma, of course, to stick to the body of the bird, the flower, the insect, to stick to the body of the insect. And artificial pollination made by humans, when the other methods doesn't succeed, by air or by insects, the man must make pollination by himself to allow the growth of the crops to produce large number of fruits or crops. This happened in the case of palm tree, which has large size pollen grains. Give reason. Stamens. Sometimes human has to pollinate palm tree. The answer, to ensure pollination process, as pollination is difficult to occur by air or by insects. Now we'll move to another the second step of sexual reproduction, which is called fertilization. We can define fertilization as the process of fusion between the male cell and the female cell, the male gamete and the female gamete. The male gamete, which is called pollen grain, and the female gamete, which is called egg cell. Look here, when the pollen grain falls on the stigma in stage number 1, after pollination, the pollen grain stick to the stigma, which secrete sugary solution. Now the pollen grain fall on the stigma. Step number 2, the pollen grain germinates, forming a pollen tube containing 2 male nuclei. As you see in the picture, 2 male nuclei produced, and the pollen tube extend down in the style, penetrates the style. Stage number 3, pollen tube extend through the style till it reaches the ovule inside the ovary through the micropyle. The micropyle is the place in which the pollen tube penetrate the ovule, and the male nucleus penetrate the egg cell, fertilize the egg cell through this point. Stage number 4, at the end of pollen tube degenerate, the end of the pollen tube degenerates, and one of the 2 male nuclei fuses or combines with the ovum, the egg cell, forming a fertilized ovum, which is known as zygote. Now fertilization happens and the zygote is formed. The zygote is formed inside the ovule, which change after fertilization into a seed. The ovule change into a seed, and the ovary itself change into a fruit. Here, stage number 5, the zygote divide many times. After it was 1 cell, it become 2 cells, 4 cells, 8, 16, 32, and so on, until it make the embryo, which you can grow it and make a new plant. The embryo inside the seed. The embryo is formed inside the seed. So we can define fertilization in plant as a process of fusion the nucleus of the male cell pollen grain with the nucleus of the female cell ovum to form the zygote. And we can define the zygote as the cell resulting from fusion of pollen grain and ovum nuclei. Sometimes the fruit contain 1 seed, like peach, or like mango, for example, or olive, or dates. We can see some fruits contain 1 seed only, and some fruits contain many seeds. If you ask me a question, why some fruits contain 1 seed only and some fruits contain many seeds like beans or peas or guava or so on, lemon or orange, it has many seeds. The answer will be, if the ovary contain 1 ovule, the fruit will contain 1 seed, like peach and olive. And if the ovary contain many seeds, like beans or peas, the fruit will contain many seeds. And here we will stop. We will continue the asexual reproduction in another video. Thank you very much. I hope you listen to the video and read it in the book again, inshallah, and we will make a video for revision and questions on this lesson another time, inshallah. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.